What's going on, guys? This is Boss Jansen, and today I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. This is my first video on the setup out here, and I wanted to take this time to talk about drum microphone placements. So yeah, I want to talk about placing drum microphones around the kit, and I do want to preface with a couple disclaimers. First of all, I'm focusing just on placements, the microphones themselves. You may have your own preferences, I have my own preferences, but this is mostly looking at how I believe you can maximize whatever microphones you have in terms of placement. Secondly, I have to remind you all that you can't polish a turd. The drum kit has to be tuned well, the appropriate sizes you need for the application. The room plays a factor. You see we have a bunch of rugs and carpets and curtains and all that going on to get a good sound in here before you can expect any magic to happen on the microphones. And lastly, make sure, regardless of what we talk about here in terms of phase and appropriate distances and stuff, that you still, first thing before you start mixing your drums, is that you're checking phase, because that's going to make a big difference regardless of any other factor. With that being said, let's go play some mics. We'll go bottom up, so let me go meet you at the kick drum. Now, before we jump in, I just want to say a quick thank you to Onstage Stands. They're all the stands you see here, these drum clips, the cables, these headphones, the sticks. So they really looked out for me and really helped me in my move here to Atlanta to get me set up and keep the train rolling. So yeah, huge shout out to them. You can see everything looks super sleek and sturdy and professional. So I can't say enough good things about their stands. So yeah, go check them out. And last little preface I forgot before is that the setup of whoever's playing the drums, whether it's you engineering for yourself or engineering someone else playing, their setup and if they feel comfortable behind the drums is the most important thing. And then the mics go in around that as best as possible, because the sound of being uncomfortable behind your drum set is going to carry through the mics as well. So all the tips I'm giving are to be followed to the best of your ability, but if, for example, you can't fit this tom under the crash because of how they want to set up, you can't change that. Can someone tell me why kick drums have to be so low to the ground? But anyway, let's start talking about this. I have an AKG D112 mic here with me. This resonant head, or at least I guess the porthole rather, isn't what I typically have on a kick drum, but this is just what we have here right now. But as far as placement, I typically have it just right in line with the porthole. I have it off center in this case just because putting it right in the middle of the drum acoustically is kind of where a dead spot builds up in the waveforms. So that's why I have it off center in this case, but on your typical ported head in the bottom corner, that's totally fine. I just have it placed here because I like the balance of resonance of the drum as well as attack of the beater right there. So now I'm going to cut to a little demo where I'm just playing the kick drum, and you'll see different placements come up, and you can choose for yourself if you agree with me. As far as these drums, the methodology is all basically the same. Just having these two is going to show you basically two different angles of the same thing. But starting with the snare, the basic premise is just to kind of get the microphone to get an overarching perspective of the center of the drum, because that's where the meat of the tone is going to come out. I see a lot of people tuck their mic in to point the mic as close as possible to the rim, and that's not for me, let me just say that. So yeah, you can see here on the Shure SM57, my snare mic here, it's pointed to the center of the drum. And then you can see from this tom mic, the Shure PGA 56. What, does it double as a golf ball? But you can see that it's kind of higher and arched over the drum to get the full perspective of what I'm hitting here. Another thing to keep in mind is that drum mics are almost always cardioid microphones, which means they don't get any sound in from behind. So you can tactically place any of these mics to kind of reject any of the sound sources you don't want it to catch. So like here, I have it placed slightly under the hi-hat to try and reject as much of that as possible. Same for this tom mic and the crash. And I say that to be looking for this as much as possible. You can see for this tom, it's not possible to get it under the ride to reject that. But with that, let's check out the quick demo on our snare and see how we like the sound of this placement. Back on the ground I go. For snare bottom, I like to use a small diaphragm condenser mic. That's what you'll see here, a pencil condenser. I just like the faster transient response it gets. The snap of the bottom of the snare, which is really what you want, in my opinion, out of the snare bottom. But I like to have it a little further away than you might typically see. I normally see people use like a Shure SM57, placed like as close as possible here. But yeah, I like it a little further away because you just get the full air of the snare drum down there. It sounds nice and bright, and yeah, as I said, gets the snap that we need. So let's take a look at how that sounds. But yeah, we already talked a little bit about our toms before, but here you can, see it again from a different angle. And whether it's clips or, mic stands, the same principles apply. You just try and get an overarching perspective of the tom so you can get the full tone out of it. And where possible, look for rejection from other sources. But if it's not possible, it's not possible. Let's check out how these placements sound. And now our floor tom. Yeah, not much new to cover here, of course. It's just another tom. But I would like to say I like to use a bass drum mic for my floor toms just because the type of music I play and engineer for most commonly wants a very deep floor tom. This is a 16, very deep. So I like to use a kick drum mic for that. And if anything, trying to get in slightly even more overarching perspective than your rack toms just because this drum is so much fuller. But yeah, let's see how it sounds. Let's do the little back and forth demo. So last but not least, let's talk about overheads here. I have a space pair in front of me of large diaphragm condensers. I prefer large diaphragm condensers, but if you need a more aggressive rock sound, you can use small diaphragm condensers for the same reasons I talked about before with the faster transient response and that. But I like a nice full sound and my cymbals not to sound too harsh, so I just gravitate towards large diaphragm condensers. And then as far as the positioning, yeah, as I said, it's a space pair. Often you can see, like an XY or something like directly over the center of the kit, but I'm not as much of a fan of that. It doesn't sound as wide to me as a space pair, and it's easier to set up this way. So this is where I've ended up. So if we get down to the nitty-gritty of the placement, the ride side overhead I have just pointed straight down, approximately where the ride crosses over with the floor tom, straight down that kind of line. And then for the hi-hat side, the snare side, whatever you want to call it, is straight down where the hi-hat meets the snare, straight down that side. And then it's super important to check that they're equidistant so that they're in phase. As I said before, you still have to check phase after in your mix, but you can get it as close as possible and make sure that the snare is a nice center in your image. And the way you measure that is with a spare cable you have lying around. I'm just going to use this headphone cable for the sake of convenience. People measure the center from either the snare or the kick. Up to you. I choose the snare because I high pass out a lot of the kick in my overheads anyway. So that's why I end up doing it from the snare. So you basically just take the cable, put it in the center of your snare, measure it out to one of your microphones, and then measure it across to make sure it's equidistant. It's, you know, it's the same place, the same length. Yes, I did set this up and check this before I started taping, so that's why it worked out so perfectly. But yeah, as far as adjusting it, I would say, I guess, decide which you like the placement of more. While I was placing them, I noticed I needed to bring this one in closer or push that one further away. I was reluctant to move this one closer because I didn't want it to get too close to the cymbals. So that's why I measured from here and saw that I needed to bring it this far away from the cymbals. So I just moved it up. As far as the demo, I'm not going to switch a bunch of positions and stuff just because I'm too lazy. Yeah, sorry. And with that being said, we've covered everything. If you noticed, I kept it to 8 mics so it can fit in your 8-channel interface. If you have less than that, you're going to struggle to get a lot of the detail and definition and isolation in your recording. Maybe my next video will involve extra miking techniques if you were afforded the opportunity to have more inputs. But here's 8 that we have so far. I'm going to play you guys out with just an example of the kit altogether. There's going to be nothing more than checking phase, levels, and panning. I'm not going to do any other mixing above that, just so you can see how these placements all sound together. But yeah, if there's any questions left over, please leave them in the comments. If not, subscribe and make sure you don't miss the next gems coming up. And other than that, have fun mixing.